Hey everyone, and welcome. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. In this explainer, we're going to look closely at some truly fascinating source material regarding a feeling we all know, well, entirely too well. We are going to unpack the neuroscience of feeling bored.
I want you to picture this. You're sitting in an incredibly tedious meeting. Or, I don't know, maybe you're stuck doing this mind-numbingly slow, repetitive task. The clock is literally barely moving. You feel restless, agitated, and just desperate for an escape. Ask yourself, what is your brain actually doing in that exact moment when it appears to be doing absolutely nothing? Okay, let's dive into this, because the source material completely shatters our standard assumptions here. The big myth is that when we're bored, our brain is just resting, powered down, or basically asleep. But the reality is far different. Boredom is not a state of neural quiet, it's an active state of neural conflict. While you might look perfectly still on the outside, there's an absolute storm raging inside your skull.
Now that you're hooked on this idea of a neural war zone, here's our agenda to map it all out. 1. The myth of quiet brains. 2. The default mode network. 3. The anatomy of boredom. 4. The chemical equation. And 5. The power of boredom.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the myth of quiet brains, uncovering the internal storm.
So, neuroimaging has completely upended our understanding of this storm. When neuroscientists first started putting bored people into fMRI scanners, they fully expected to find a quiet, inactive brain. Instead, what they discovered was kinda mind-blowing. Boredom is an active, demanding neural state. The brain wasn't doing less, it was just failing to allocate its cognitive resources effectively. It turns out that when your brain lacks adequate engagement, it triggers this highly complex response. It's essentially your brain realizing that your current activity simply isn't worth the cognitive resources you're spending on it, and it begins loudly protesting.
Moving to Section 2, the default mode network, the brain's inward turn. So, the crucial point is, to understand what the brain does when it disengages from the outside world, we have to look at the default mode network, or DMN. This is basically a constellation of brain regions that lights up when you're not actively focused on a task in the external world. When you're bored, your attention networks struggle to stay locked onto that tedious meeting. Because external engagement fails, the DMN takes over. It drives mind-wandering, daydreaming, and self-referential thought. You start thinking about your plans, your memories, or maybe that super awkward thing you said 3 years ago. The DMN is the primary neural signature of boredom, lighting up in neuroimaging scans as your brain turns inward for the stimulation it just isn't getting from your environment.
Which brings us to Section 3, the anatomy of boredom, the neural war zone.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fact that the DMN doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's actually part of a rapid-fire conflict happening across multiple brain networks. Let's look at the key players in this war zone. First, you have the default mode network, shifting your focus to internal processing. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain trying to be responsible, is desperately struggling to maintain voluntary focus on the boring task. Then you have the anterior insular cortex. Think of this as your brain's internal thermostat. It monitors your physical and emotional state and detects a massive mismatch between how stimulated you want to be and how unstimulating the room actually is. And my personal favorite, the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC. This region acts like an overworked accountant. It computes cognitive effort versus reward. And as you sit there, it's loudly declaring that the cost of paying attention is way too high for such a terribly low reward.
Let's break down how this plays out over time, step by step, almost like the agonizing tick-tock of a clock in a quiet room. Step 1, your environment lacks stimulation. Step 2, your DMN turns your attention inward to find something interesting. Step 3, your prefrontal cortex tries to force you to pay attention to the external world anyway. And Step 4, your ACC accountant registers this growing cognitive deficit. This is exactly why boredom intensifies the longer it goes on. The metabolic effort required to force your external focus keeps climbing, while the reward stays completely flat. Eventually, the signal becomes overwhelming, and you just want to stop doing what you're doing.
Next up, Section 4, the chemical equation, the neurotransmitters of boredom. To truly understand this intense feeling of frustration, we really have to look at the chemical equation. The subjective experience of boredom is heavily regulated by 3 main chemical pathways. First, we have dopamine. Now, dopamine isn't just about reward, it's about reward prediction. Your brain maintains a model of how rewarding an experience should be. Boredom is, in part, a negative dopamine prediction error. Reality is simply underperforming your expectations, causing a huge dip in motivation. Next is serotonin. Low levels of serotonin actually increase your sensitivity to monotony, making you feel restless and dissatisfied. And third, norepinephrine, which manages your baseline arousal and vigilance.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when we look closer at that third chemical pathway. The source material highlights the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system, or LCNE system. This system needs to maintain a steady tonic firing rate to keep you in a zone of optimal focus. When you're understimulated, this firing rate drops below a critical threshold. You literally fall into a state of hypoarousal. Your attention networks underactivate, and you experience that severe mental lethargy that makes your eyelids feel like they weigh 10 pounds each.
Finally, Section 5, the power of boredom, finding meaning in the void.
But wait, why would our brains be wired to make us feel so terrible? Well, according to the source material, during boredom, your brain actually exhibits a widespread increase in alpha band power on an EEG, specifically between 8 and 13 hertz. This is known in neuroscience as cortical idling. Because the environment isn't providing high-priority stimulation, your brain literally disengages its normal selective attention. It idles. It just sits in the void. But here's the kicker. This void isn't useless.
To bridge the gap between hard neuroscience and existential purpose, the sources highlight a concept from philosopher Martin Heidegger. He distinguished between superficial boredom, like just waiting for a train, and what he called profound boredom. In profound boredom, time seems to stretch out, and things lose their everyday meaning. As Heidegger put it, this boredom wishes to tell us something. It disrupts our habitual, distracted modes of just killing time. It forces us to stop, sit in the discomfort, and actually think deeply about what we're doing and how we are interacting with the world.
Let's move to and see how this builds directly into real-world neurological benefits. Boredom is an evolutionary push. That discomfort you feel, it's an emotional compass, signaling that your current path isn't rewarding and steering you toward a much better use of your time. Furthermore, because your default mode network is highly active, this state promotes self-reflection and daydreaming. Studies in the source material even show that by allowing the brain to engage in unconstrained thinking, a boring task can actually boost subsequent creativity. Your brain needs this downtime to wander, to connect disparate ideas, and to innovate.
So, what does this all mean for us? The next time you find yourself stuck in a tedious situation, feeling that internal neural conflict ramping up and your brain idling at 8 to 13 hertz, remember that your mind is trying to tell you something. It's opening a door to profound thought and creativity. I want to leave you with this question. Instead of immediately reaching for your phone to kill the time, how will you use your next moment of boredom? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I can't wait to dive into our next topic with you.